Well, what I thought we should talk about this morning, since we seem to range wide and free, is the practicum of all this, which is, how many of these vision plants are there, and where are they, and how do you obtain them, and how do you use them once you obtain them? This is a poster, which I don't even know if it's still available. It may be out of print. It is still available. And it's a very good ethnobotanical course in hallucinogens on one sheet of paper. What it's divided into, basically, is this is the old world, and this is the new. Immediately you notice that there are a lot more hallucinogens in the new world than the old. This is one of the great puzzles of evolutionary botany, because nobody can offer a reasonable explanation as to why there should be nearly 3 times as many hallucinogenic plants in the new world as in the old. I mean, other than that's where the flying saucers planted them, nobody has come up with a good explanation. Well, let's do a little quick geographical tour. First of all, North America, for reasons not well understood, is quite poor in native hallucinogens. There are no major North American hallucinogens. Peyote is, well, yes, it's North American. The funny thing about peyote is, we have this tremendous respect for it. We imagine that it's tremendously ancient, and it apparently isn't. There is no archaeological evidence of peyote use any earlier than 500 years ago. It's almost a phenomenon of the conquest. What you find in the old graves in the peyote cultural area are the seeds of Sephora secundifolia, which is an ordeal poison, strychnine. And human-plant symbiotic relationships evolve over time. It may be that the use of hallucinogens is still in fairly dynamic evolution all over the planet. Peyote is a major hallucinogen, should have been used for the past 50,000 years. If it has only been used for the past 500 years, that's pretty peculiar, all right, and yet that appears to be the evidence. Ibogaine, not only a visionary hallucinogen, but an aphrodisiac as well, no evidence of any use before 1850. And yet, in an area where the Portuguese had been trading for the past 500 years and writing cultural descriptions and interviewing the people, I mean, if it was there, it would have been mentioned. So that this is a puzzle. Ayahuasca use, we assume, is millennia old. But on the other hand, archaeology is a real miserable proposition in the Amazon because the climate is so degradative. So we can't really know. But aside from peyote and whatever its history, North America seems to have only minor hallucinogens that have been utilized shamanically. Another puzzle about culture and attitudes is, as you all know, the Northwest Coast Indians, the Kwakiutl, Shimsham, and Tlingit language groups, have an extraordinarily evolved shamanism, and were the people who developed that X-ray vision style of art. Well, their cultural area has the densest number of psilocybin mushrooms of any place in the world. No cultural evidence of psilocybin use. No evidence that these people even knew these things were there. I mean, I know this challenges the tradition of the all-knowing Aboriginal, but, that this is what the data seems to imply. Now, in Southern California and across portions of the Southwest, there have been Datura religions, which are very old, apparently. The so-called Talach religion. I don't recommend Datura. I don't know what astrological sign you have to be to make your peace with that stuff. But I find it really peculiar and menacing. It's about magic. which is about power and control and usually sexuality in some invasive and dominator application. I've taken Datura a number of times, and it's been interesting, but it feels watery and dark and dangerous to me. There was a period when I lived in Nepal when I became aware that these sadhus, not content with their superior meditation techniques and their endless smoking of hashish, were also availing themselves of the seeds of Datura metal, which is conspecific to what we call Jimson weed in this country. And so I thought, well, I should take this too and find out what it's about. Well, it was a very odd trip. I sat in my room in Bodhanath, and I would sit and say, nothing is happening, nothing is happening. Well, you can only think that so many times. Then my mind would drift into a kind of twilight state, and then these wraith-like entities, I mean, they were like Victorian ghosts, you know, they were like women in shredded damask gowns or something, would fly into my window carrying newspaper sheets in their outstretched arms, and they would let these sheets of newspaper flutter down onto my lap, and I would begin to read, and I would be so astonished by what I was reading that it would jerk me out of it, and I would say, what's happening? Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Yeah, nothing's happening. And then my attention would drift, and this would happen again. Well, then after about a half an hour of that, as the stuff began to build up, I began to, I would undergo these very brief periods of unconsciousness, and when I came out of them, I would discover that my leg had been thrown up around behind my head, and my arm shot through, and I was all knotted up. And then I would very carefully unfold myself and lay back down. And I remember thinking, I'm certainly glad there's nobody else here, because this is the kind of thing just designed to drive a sitter into a conniption fit of alarm. And, about 6 times over the next hour and a half, I went into these convulsive spasms. And, then on another night, these English people shared a suite of rooms off of mine, and I had to get to the bathroom. I had to go through this one guy's room. So this one night, I hadn't taken Datura, but this fellow had taken Datura, and at one point, I had to go to the John, so I debated for a long time about how this was going to disturb his trip, and maybe I should piss out the window, but no, that didn't seem, although in India it's perfectly all right. And so finally I decided I would just walk through the room. So then as I was tiptoeing through the room, I saw that he was actually having sex with this girl that we knew from Kathmandu, and it had a slight emotional tinge for me because I had actually had my eye on her, although I had never said anything about it to anybody. So then the next morning I mentioned this, and he said that yes, it had been his impression as well, but that in fact she wasn't there. And so it was I saw somebody else's hallucination. And then what finally decided me that Datura was too peculiar was I had another English friend who lived a couple of houses away. And one day I was in the market buying potatoes, and this guy came along, and we were just talking. And in the course of this conversation, he was telling me how he'd been taking a lot of Datura. And in the course of this conversation, I became aware that he thought that I was visiting him in his apartment. And I decided that's too fucked up, to not know whether you're entertaining someone in the confines of your apartment or buying vegetables in the market means that you have become too disengaged from the modalities of the real. And of course, it creates tremendous drying, and it's a deliriant, is what the literature calls it. It's a deliriant. But these, I think that people all over the world utilize plants for bizarre experiences. Time and time again, I've run up against this. There's a very rare drug in South America called ukuhe. Ukuhe. It's made by the Witoto and the Bora and the Muinani in this very circumscribed area. And what fascinated us about it was that it was an orally active DMT drug. And we couldn't, as pharmacologists, understand how an orally active DMT drug was possible, because the DMT should be destroyed in your gut. So we wanted to get a sample of this stuff. And it's made from the resin of Varrola trees. The inner bark of the Varrola sheds a red resin. And we eventually, in 1981, my brother and I and Wade Davis, the guy who wrote The Serpent and the Rainbow, we all launched an expedition up the Rio Yaguas Yasu, and where there was this stuff. And we would do what we called bioassays, which means somebody has to test this stuff, because we would get samples from these shaman, and we would draw straws for who got to do the bioassay. Well, taking this ukuhe was appalling. I mean, your heart rate goes up to about 3 times normal. You shed water by the gallon. Your blood pressure shoots up. I mean, it felt like a pre-coronary to me. And then we come down and say to this shaman, Lorenzia, what's the story? And he said, yeah, it takes getting used to, doesn't it? And so then when you look at it, when you look at this ukuhe chemically, you see, well, yes, there's DMT in there, and there's 5-MeO DMT in there. But then, when you do the gas chromatogram, you see that marching along behind those spots are all these other spots of various tryptamine compounds, some of which are cardioregulators, some of which nobody knows what they do. And so then you realize that it's a dirty drug. There's too much junk in there. What you want is something that has a very clean signature. So ukuhe didn't exactly seem the way to go. I think that this is the real situation with Amanita muscaria. Probably the most discussed, uninteresting drug in the world, because so many people have tried to hang so much on it. And it's a horrible experience most of the time. And occasionally you'll meet someone who says, well, you're just wrong. It's wonderful. I've taken it for years. I love it. And I, don't know. First of all, it's genetically variable. It's geographically variable. It's seasonally variable. And it fluctuates at various times in its process of maturation. So what must be going on with Amanita muscaria is you have to learn how to take it in your area from people who know where to collect it, when to collect it, how much to collect, and how to prepare it. But if you just go out and find one and chow down, I guarantee you it'll turn you every way but loose. And then it'll turn you loose. So,
But have you done it by drinking the urine?
No, that's what they always say. They say, have you drunk your urine recently? I got a letter last week. No, I understand that do you all understand the basis of the question? Why does urine come into it? Because in Siberia, they have discovered, which is where this Amanita thing originates, that the active principle is not destroyed inside your body, that it is excreted in the urine. And the true aficionados of this stuff believe that the so-called second pass is better than the first pass, and they drink the urine one of the great hazards of Siberian shamanism is stepping outside of the yurt on a snowy night to take a leak and being pitched head first into the snow by frantic reindeer who butt you out of the way to try to get to the yellow snow because they're so completely hooked on Amanita that nothing stands in their way of this stuff.
I thought you were going to say that it's your students.
Oh, your students pushing you out of them. Well, I've never hung out with the Yakuts. Maybe they are a pretty wild-eyed gang. An example of how a very ancient folkway can be incorporated into our culture without us even realizing it, and is provided by discussing Amanita muscaria. If you go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and you look up Santa Claus, they'll tell you that it has to do with St. Nicholas and it got started in the 11th century. But when you look at the Santa Claus story, it's a perfect mythologium to analyze from this point of view, because look what's going on with Santa Claus. First of all, Santa Claus's colors are red and white, the colors of the Amanita muscaria, for sure. Santa Claus lives at the North Pole. What does this mean? It means that Santa Claus lives at the Axis Mundi, where Yggdrasil, the magic world ash of Welsh mythology, has taken root. Santa Claus flies. This is what shamans do. Santa Claus is the master of the reindeer, the animal most associated with the Amanita muscaria. Santa Claus is aided in his work by troops of elves. And what is the work of Santa Claus? To build toys for children. Remember the DMT things saying, look at this, look at this. Well, those were off-duty elves, clearly. So here are all the motifs, and I believe that for children in our culture, that all the Christer stuff is not what Christmas is about. Christmas is about standing in front of the tree on Christmas morning with the gifts arrayed and the twinkling lights on. Well, that tree is the tree that the Amanita muscaria forms its symbiotic relationship to. It's always spruce or pine that it has a mycorrhizal relationship to. So the number of motifs relating Santa Claus to a cult of Amanita muscaria, there's almost nothing but relational motifs there. And yet if you suggest this to people, they just back away in horror, you know. Well, these hallucinogenic plants seem clustered in the New World in two areas. The first area is the Sierra Mazateca of central Mexico and related areas. And there you have a number of things overlapping. You have a mushroom area of multiple species where, unlike the Kwakiutl Shimsham Tlingit language area, in this central Mexican language area, they absolutely did use and discover these mushrooms, and we have these things called mushroom stones that go 2500 BC. So the mushroom religion is truly archaic in Mexico. In the same cultural area, you have the morning glory seeds that come from Ipomoea purpura and related hybrids. Are you all familiar with these? This is a psychedelic plant that you can grow yourself and take. Don't buy the packages of seeds and take them, because a benevolent government has made sure that they are soaked in horrendous poison so that you can't get loaded on them. But you can grow a crop out of them that will be toxin-free. And this is a tremendous visionary intoxicant. It takes a couple of hundred of these seeds. But in that same area, strangely enough, there's another morning glory, Turbina coriumbosa, it used to be called Rivia coriambosa, that as few as 13 seeds will flatten you. Now, it's interesting, as long as we're talking about morning glory seeds, to note that by weight, probably the strongest plant hallucinogen in the world is Hawaiian baby wood rose. And yet there is no record of any culture ever utilizing that. There are 13 species of argyria. It's called Hawaiian baby wood rose, but it has nothing to do with Hawaii. It's native to India. There are 13 species of argyria scattered from southern India out to Fiji, and all contain ergot-like, LSD-like compounds, like chinoclavine and so forth. These, I got started on morning glory seeds because they were available, but don't sell this stuff short, folks. I mean, it'll give you a ride that you'll never forget. And the baby wood rose, even more so. Be very careful with the Hawaiian baby wood rose because it contains cardioactive glycosides. And, if maybe 6 seeds will do you. 12 seeds might well plant you. And 12 seeds will fit on a tablespoon. So this is nothing to start choking down in large amounts, yeah.
Are those cardioactive glycosides volatile?
Yes, and could be extracted in a fairly simple filtration system. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Morning glory seeds can be dried. Do you grind them up?
Well, they are dry. They're little crescent-shaped dry things. Yeah, grind them in a brawn grinder. Applesauce is the favorite carrier for these disgusting things, or milkshakes. But it would be good to look into doing a little chemistry. The emetic in the morning glories is ester coumarone, not the cardioactive glycoside in argyria nervosa, but in Ipomea purpura, it's ester coumarone. And you could devise a simple chemical system for removing that. And I think LSD, have you ever had what's called wood rose LSD? Well, it's wonderful. It's unlike LSD. It's more like psilocybin because it is highly visionary. And one of the things about these morning glories is, I don't know whether we have to talk about Rupert's theory or what, but it is just an archive of Mayan and Toltec imagery. I mean, you take this stuff and you're there in the pyramidal complex on the day of Venus's heliacal rising when they do their thing. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Isn't the active ingredient lysergic acid ethylamide instead of diethylamide?
It's a close relative. It's active not in the microgram range, but in the milligram range. And there are several active compounds. You're right, and I think chinoclavine is psychoactive, and ergonovine. All these occur there.
So do you grind those and swallow them whole, or make an infusion?
No, you grind them to a powder, and then just take it. Capsule them. It's a lot of capsules. It's like half a cup of this horrible whitish meal with a strange smell. Basically about 200 seeds. You may want to go higher, but start with that. The way they do it, where I've seen it, is they take the little seeds and they grind them on a metate to powder. Then they put it in water and they shake it and leave it and come back an hour later and shake it again and do that for a while. And then the stuff precipitates to the bottom, the matter, and the liquid fraction is poured off and discarded. And they take the solid matter and they let it dry in the sun until it's no longer runny, but it's a kind of like the consistency of oatmeal or Play-Doh or something like that, and then they make a little tiny tortilla, which they then toast on a metal griddle, and so you get this thing which looks slightly smaller than a Ritz cracker, and is a toasted morning glory seed wafer, and you eat that, and that is the thing which is active. That's how I've seen it done.
Heat doesn't destroy the active compounds then.
Apparently not. They toast it lightly. They don't. It's not blackened. It's just sort of golden.
Is this the morning glory seeds we're talking about, or the wine baby?
No, it's one species of morning glory, Turbina, previously called Revia coriambosa. The other one, the morning glory that you have to take a couple of hundred seeds for, is used in that area as a hallucinogen, but it's also used to induce labor and has a whole role in midwifery and like that.
Okay, because I got confused. I thought we were talking about this cardiovascular regulator.
No, that's the Hawaiian wood rose, and it has no history of human usage, so you're on your own. Do you all know what ibogaine is? It's a psychedelic. It's an interesting one. One of the things interesting about it is how little people are aware of its existence. It's the root scrapings of an African small tree or bush called Tabernantha iboga. And interestingly enough, it's a true aphrodisiac. Perhaps the only real aphrodisiac in the world, because what are called aphrodisiacs are usually either just stimulants or things which cause genital itching. But ibogaine actually seems to be, works on the psychology of sexual drive in some way. It's a powerful hallucinogen. One of the puzzling things about ibogaine is that we can't confirm its use by human beings before 1850. And, the Portuguese were into the areas of Africa where this is happening. They've been in there since the 1430s. So it probably is a new pattern of drug use that has arisen, and it's a major force among the Fang people of Zaire and Gabon, holding back Christianity and mission culture. And it's a visionary hallucinogen, without doubt.
How do you spell it, Terence?
ibogaine. Probably in the future, eventually society will get around to exploiting this particular one, just like it does everything else. Yeah?
You mentioned combining DMT with hormone.
Mm-hmm.
What is the experience, what is the change in the experience from the two?
Well, that's what ayahuasca is. You see, the DMT is then not destroyed in your intestine, and so you have a slow-release DMT trip by doing that.
Is that done with smoking DMT after ingesting hormone?
In theory, and probably in fact, that would be a tremendously successful way to get very loaded. The problem is it might be a too successful way. You want to be very careful with these MAO inhibitors. There are MAO inhibitors that drug companies have produced where a single dose inhibits all the MAO in your body for up to a month. This would be murder if you got around some DMT on that. The nice thing about harmine is that it's fully reversible in 4 to 6 hours. So it's a gentle MAO inhibitor. But yes, this is the strategy. This is why you could conceivably take the seeds of a plant like Pergamon harmala, which grows around here, more or less, and contains harmine, and combine it with a plant like Desmanthus illinoisensis, which contains DMT, and come up with a North American pseudo-ayahuasca of some sort. People are doing this, but, if you think it takes courage to just do these compounds naturally, imagine the kind of courage it takes to diddle with recipes and to do your own bioassay, which you must do because the cook must taste the soup.
Terence, what was the first plant? Not the Desmanthus, but the other one?
Pergamon harmala, P-E-G-A-M-U-M, Pergamum harmala in the Zygophalaceae. Yeah.
I was listening to the True Hallucinations tape, and I was wondering if you and Dennis ever tried your experiment again? If not, why not? And what else are you ever doing with that?
Well, we never tried the experiment again because Dennis felt that he'd really made the maximum contribution to the effort. There are many experiments, though, which could be tried, which would put no human being in danger. For instance, you could use square wave generators, which are acoustical generators, to try and drive these drug molecules into DNA in vitro, in a test tube. You know, what you would do is you would simply put the denatured DNA into solution, put some DMT into the solution, shake it furiously, ultracentrifuge the mix to get the loose DMT out, and then weigh the DNA and see if its weight had increased by a number which was magically divisible by the molecular weight of the DMT molecule. These kinds of studies have been done and show that DMT does intercalate and locate itself into DNA. So, yeah, there are a lot of different things like that that could be done that wouldn't put anyone at risk.
So Dennis really felt that he was at risk in a very serious way if he hadn't done it.
Well, he doesn't remember it very clearly. His impression was that it lasted about 5 days. It actually lasted 3 weeks. So the real stuff that would have alarmed him, he fortunately was too out of it to see or remember. But I was there throughout the whole thing and saw it. And I think it would be nice to understand the parameters of the effect a little more clearly before we charge off and try that particular trick again, yeah.
Can you tell us that?
Well, this is what's being referred to is in True Hallucinations, which is a tape set which will be published as a book next year. It describes an expedition to the Amazon in 1971, which was really where we got the whammy. I mean, I'm still running on what happened from, the 28th of February 1971 to the 21st of March. The rest of my life is pretty much throwaway. But I don't know, it was weirder than flying saucer abduction, because there's a whole form for it. It was hard to say. Something was waiting for us down in the Amazon, and as soon as we started taking these mushrooms, it began making suggestions about how you could use the mushroom and your voice and certain other materials present at hand in that environment to essentially condense the soul into three-dimensional space, or create the Philosopher's Stone inside your body and then give birth to it, or, in other words, some radical transformation of the ontology of being human was held out as a possibility. And it all came down to an experiment that he wanted to perform that seemed to me so unlikely to have any effect whatsoever that I felt it was perfectly all right to let this experiment go forward, because I would have bet dollars to donuts that nothing would happen. Instead, all hell broke loose at the conclusion of this experiment, and he claimed at the time that what he had done was bonded into my DNA enough psilocybin in a superconducting kind of bond, which, if you know how superconductivity works, a superconductive bond is very hard to disrupt. It's not like an ordinary chemical bond. And he felt that you could do what he called bell the cat, that you could actually hang a transceiver around the neck of the logos itself. And from then on, it would talk to you constantly in the confines of your own mind. And it just seemed so wildly improbable to me that it went forward. But in fact, at the conclusion of the experiment, something changed in me, and I essentially became who I now appear to be. But before that, I wasn't. I was sort of a wastrel and a undirected person of some sort. And then you will see when we get the computer what the bottom line of this is, because what was eventually revealed was a kind of mathematical mandala of space and time that rested on for its veracity on the fact that it made prediction of the future possible. And you can judge for yourself whether this is the product of a pathological incident or, in fact, an intellectual leap comparable to Newton's laws of motion or something like that. I think, in principle, all this is possible. I think transforming, part of what human history's conclusion will be is what I call turning the human body inside out. We want the soul to become visible. We want the body to become an idea freely commanded in the imagination. And then at that point, as James Joyce said, man will be dirigible. That was as close as he could get in 1939 to saying you'll turn into a flying saucer. He knew it was an airship, he knew it was oblate, but he thought it was a dirigible. Anyway, yeah.
I just have a matter of clarification about the ayahuasca.
Uh-huh.
You said that it has the DMT and the harmine in it.
Yes.
Well, the vine has not?
No. Good point. The vine contains the harmine. Another plant contains the DMT. This makes ayahuasca unique among these shamanic tools because you see all the rest of them, peyote, mushrooms, San Pedro, ibogaine, morning glories, and whatever else, cannabis, are simply plants which you ingest. Ayahuasca is a drug, a product, something made by pharmacologists. I mean, pharmacologists who wear penis sheaths, but pharmacologists nevertheless, you see. So suddenly, the human dimension enters into it. Not all ayahuasca is alike. Ayahuasca depends on the personality of the person who made it. So it's not about a relationship between you and a plant. When you take ayahuasca, between you and the plants, there stands a human being. And, if you're headed down there to seriously get into this, don't give up in a hurry. You will drink a lot of swill before you find someone who is conscientious enough, honest enough, and cares about you enough to not shortchange you in some way.
Harmine used to be called telepathy.
Telepathine, yes. Ayahuasca was discovered by Richard Spruce in 1853, and then in the early years of the 20th century, the German ethnographer Theodor Koch-Grünberg brought a lot of it back to Berlin, and Louis Lewin and his group characterized an alkaloid, which they named telepathine. But it was not realized then until, I think, 1957 by the chemists Hochstein and Paradis that telepathine was exactly the same compound as an earlier compound isolated from the Syrian rue named harmine. And since the rules of chemical nomenclature are that the first compound, the first name takes precedent, telepathine had to be dropped and harmine substituted. But it tells you how convinced these early ethnographers were that this stuff was exciting paranormal mental abilities. What Koch-Grünberg took back to Berlin was the liana, the vine, Banisteriopsis caapi. The other active ingredient in ayahuasca was not isolated chemically until 1956. One of the great mysteries of ayahuasca is how, out of 475,000 species of plants in the Amazon, these people figured out that you pound the vine and combine it with the leaves and then go through this elaborate boiling and concentrating, and then you get this fantastic visionary beverage. If you ask them how they figured it out, they say the plants told us, which is so far the best answer anybody has come up with. In 1962, Melvin Bristol, who was a graduate student of Richard Evans Schultes at Harvard, was studying ayahuasca among the Sibundoy Indians, and he took ayahuasca, and during the trip, a plant was revealed to him, and he was told that it would be alkaloid positive. And it was alkaloid positive. Well, this is now anecdotally embedded in the literature. Was it dumb luck? Was it synchronicity? Or was it that plants tell you about other plants? The way ayahuasca is used by research pharmacologists in these Amazon tribes is they brew a standard brew. And then if they have a plant that they, for some reason, suspect might have some medical usage, they will put a little bit of that plant into the ayahuasca, and then the ayahuasca will give them a readout on it and explain what it is. I had one of the longest evenings I've ever put in where I took half a dose of ayahuasca and half a dose of mushrooms, and it was absolutely god-awful. It was different than any bad trip I've ever had. It didn't seem to be about my personality. It seemed to be about core processes. There was a little Pac-Man thing, and I could see it moving through my memory, just chew, 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 and I didn't know, you know that horrifying scene in 2001 where the guy is outside the spaceship and he says, "Open the pod doors, Hal." Open the pod doors, Hal. Well, that's how I felt. I could almost see the molecular machinery had jammed. And I said, oh my God, it's not going to deanimate or dealkylate. It's somehow caught in some kind of a loop. And I sweated bullets for an hour and a half with it. It was really horrible. And then it finally released and let me go. But as I sat in that chair, I said, you know, if I can't pull out of this place, then there's a room in a back ward somewhere, and they will just sit me there and look in on me every 12 or 14 hours, and that'll be my story. It's worth talking about maybe for a minute that hallucinogens are like hotel rooms. Some are occupied and some are not. And it's always interesting to fiddle with the unoccupied ones, because if you believe Sheldrake, then it's an empty field. You know, one way of thinking of these things is when you take a plant, it takes you. So when you take mushrooms, for instance, what the trip is all the mushroom trips that anybody ever had. And you leave, you know, you make a tiny contribution too. You leave a piece of your trip in the trip. And so the trip is slowly evolving over time as those who take the plant each leaves a brick or an offering or a little architectural motif on this vast edifice. Well, then if you come, that was why, you know, a plant like Hawaiian wood rose, or to some degree Stropharia cubensis, because it is not the preferred mushroom among the Mexican traditionalists, then it's unoccupied. You can make of it what you want. It can be sort of your vehicle. And this is why, you know, a drug like ketamine, which is a new drug, a drug without 1,000 years of input. My impression of where you go on ketamine is it's like visiting a new office building that nobody has rented offices yet. I mean, all the water coolers work, and there are these recessional distances with fluorescent lighting, but, you know, there are no hurrying secretaries and crowded offices and chatter around the water fountains. It's just empty. It's empty because not enough people have left their initials on the walls, you know. One way of thinking, since somebody talked about Sheldrake earlier, one way of thinking about psychedelics in trying to define what do they do is that they are amplifiers of the morphogenetic field. That, you know, the past of objects somehow becomes present. This would fit in with my notion that when you take a psychedelic, you are rising into some kind of superspace that can be mathematically described, because having the past be co-present with the present is a way of saying that you have shifted your dimensional relationship to the data field, and now it all appears to be one coherent thing. Yeah.
You're probably familiar with Allegro and Puharich.
John Allegro and Andrzej Puharich, yeah.
Yeah. What's your assessment? Do you think there's any value of the theories in you?
Well, not to rain on anybody's parade, Andrzej Puharich is a very mercurial person. Is that what we want to say? Recall that he was the guy who pushed Uri Geller for a long time. And they were forever tromping into the Negev and coming out with blank cassettes that had held the wisdom of the galaxy, but the aliens erased them before they let them return. That could happen here. So that's Andrzej Puharich. He's been around for a long time. I mean, you have to, these people are such eccentrics. I mean, you have to just respect people's persistence and survival power. But I think, you know, his scholarship and his notion of the rules of evidence is fairly divergent even from my fairly loose canon. So, Allegro is a little different case. Do you all know the book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross? He managed to hypothesize one of the most radical theories ever to come down the pike. I don't know how true it is, but his theory is that Jesus was a mushroom. And, you know, this would not probably have cut too much mustard, except that the guy was a Dead Sea Scroll scholar of world renown, had a scholar's grasp of Aramaic and Akkadian, and was fully licensed to be one of the people who tell us what the primary documents of Christianity really mean. The problem was, when Allegro got a hold of them, he said, well, what they really mean is that a sacramental mushroom was being grown in caves by Nabateans down around Qumran, and they called it Jesus in order to befuddle the Roman authorities, and created the cheerful theory of the friendly carpenter who tells us to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And this was all a publicity stunt just to keep the Roman authorities guessing. And he claims he has textual support for this. The problem is, you have to be an Aramaic